why is transit priority implementation legitimate in some places like Zurich, but not so much here in Melbourne? And how should we be doing this sort of stuff in Melbourne? Those are the sort of questions we're trying to answer. I've been using case study methodology, which comes out of social research methods. It's good for answering, how and why questions, but where we don't really have any control over what's going on, we can't run an experiment in this sort of stuff. And the idea is you get a whole load of empirical context, and you combine that with a bit of general theory, in our case, legitimacy theory, and you come out with some new frameworks and new ideas. The sort of main thing that's been coming out of the research is this framework where we have an amount of transit priority that is legitimate and the amount of transit priority that we have. And somewhere in the middle, there's this region of stability where we're happy with the status quo. And so if you think about it, we might propose a new bus lane or something, and then everybody might oppose it, and we don't get anywhere. Or we might have some sort of compromise and we build some of it. Or we might get it through and we build the whole damn thing. Yay, we won. Or we might just go out there and build it without really asking anyone. And then chances are it's going to be a protest and we'll have to remove it. We might manage to compromise, or we might manage to keep it. That's sort of the way we see some of this sort of stuff happening. So looking at some of the places where they've had tons of success, Zurich, they had a lot of transit users in the 70s, so they're already starting pretty well. The traffic was getting bad, and then they have this weird system where they actually get to vote on everything. If it's going to cost them tons of money, there's an actual public referendum. So the people of Zurich said, no, we don't really want to pay for an underground streetcars, that's really expensive. Then they tried again to get an U-Bahn through, and that wasn't working. And then so there was this idea that we should prioritise existing streetcars. And nothing really happened. The city tried a few things, and then it finally came up for a vote in the 70s. And the city actually opposed it because the engineers said, no, we don't need all this money, we don't need this idea, we're the traffic engineers, we know what we're doing. And we're sort of doing some of this stuff already. But it passed anyway, 51%. And so the engineers then really didn't do anything. But what about the traffic? If you put in a streetcar lane, the traffic won't be able to get anywhere. Very sort of 1970s thinking. The people who were behind this idea lobbied a fair bit. And then they actually put through a directive at the city, and then they built and built and built for 30 years. And they're still doing it. They've had great success. And if we think about it through legitimacy theory, the law required a citizen ballot. 51% were in favour. It's the law. And then we've seen this transition from this conditional normative support where, yeah, we're going to prioritise transit as long as we don't affect the traffic, to this sort of the now in Zurich, it's waiting time 0. Transit should never wait. That's sort of the policy. And we've seen this gradual shift. Curitiba is quite famous for pedestrian malls, more importantly, the BRT system. And you would have seen these sorts of photos before, this tubular bus stop idea where you get on the tube and you pay your fare and then the bus turns up and you can board immediately. Level boarding before we had low floor vehicles. And so we had a little bit of a look at what happened in Curitiba. Turns out in the 40s and 30s there was a dictatorship, and then in 45 there was a military coup. And then they had this car-dominated plan, and it's a bit uncertain as to what their transit mode shift was, but it was pretty high. Lots of people using transit anyway. This guy, Jamie Lerner, lobbied for a new city plan that would be a bit more transit-focused. There was another military coup, and in the meantime, there was all this planning going on. And then the city didn't like the idea of this transit-focused plan, and then there was a whole load of controversy in these public forums. You can see it's really messy, even though Curitiba has this sort of held up as this example of great success in transit priority. It's still messy. It's not a clear story. Anyway, they got this plan through, and then the military dictator said that's it, no more mayor elections, and Jamie Lerner was appointed mayor. Essentially, by the military dictatorship, he became the mayor. And then he was an architect, but he had a fairly pragmatic view about it. He saw it as a war. There's no way to convince those people who hate the idea of, changing this into a bus and pedestrian city. We just got to go out and do it. And the great thing is that was because he was backed by the military dictatorship, he could. He went out there, they shut down the pedestrian mall, and they just built it one weekend. Can you see us doing that here in Melbourne? No. Would never happen. You just don't have the power. But he had it. Even though he had it, he had to compromise and say, oh, well, it'll only be a 6-month trial. And then they all went and complained to the state governor and said, hey, sack this guy. But the government back in and said, well, I'm busy for the next 30 days, let's see that. And then they changed their mind because it worked. They got a whole lot of people downtown and they all bought stuff in the shops. And it turns out that Lerner was right, but that said it wasn't over. The drivers had a protest, and he's a bit of a cunning sort of guy, so when they were going to protest by driving their cars through the mall to prove how important it was that people not walk through the middle of the city, he actually got all the kids out and they had an arts festival. So again, you're seeing this is really not engineering stuff, this is political action. But this is what you need sometimes to get this stuff done. Anyway, so it was a great success. He got a lot of legitimacy through this. Everybody loved him. And so then they got sort of a bit of support so that they could start building busways. The first busway was really good, and so away he goes, just keeps on building busways. And things are going great. So again, regulatory legitimacy, military dictatorship, he has the power. There's a bit of consent from the elites, but not much. But there was some legitimacy through trust, because he was an architect, engineer, so people sort of trust that he knew what he was talking about. But you can see, even then, it was still, he had to build his own legitimacy. Later on, there was a whole lot of political changes, but anyway, he'd been working in Rio trying to get this, working as an architect. He had this idea for this bus tubes thing. Passenger volumes in Curitiba were getting higher and higher. They thought about having an LRT rather than prioritising transit more, but that would have cost a whole lot of money. He got elected this time because now they were back to being a democracy. And so he managed to get the bus companies on board, and they decided, yeah, we're going to go for this tube solution. But you can see it's not really about the engineering of the tubes, it's about the support. And they've ended up building these tubes everywhere. And so they now have this amazing system, but you can see it's not this engineering thing, it's mostly about how the political thing worked. And even though it is this amazing system that everybody holds up as this model of bus transit priority and bus rapid transit, it's taken a long time to build it, and it's mostly been about building legitimacy, not the technical stuff. The technical stuff sort of doesn't really matter, really. And in this case, yeah, everybody trusted him, and he was voted in, and we should do what he says because he has legitimacy. And you can't really see that happening. And a classic example of how this goes, they tried to get the Curitiba tubes to go to New York. Yep, that sounds like a great idea. So they put them on the boats and they sent them to New York. And it didn't really work because it's a more complicated regulatory environment, and no one voted for it. And do you trust this solution from Brazil? Probably not. Anyway, so here in Melbourne, we're sort of stuck in that same sort of situation. We tried stuff in Clarendon Street. We had this great plan, Melbourne 2030. We were going to reduce tram journey time. We had this great idea. We ran this pilot. We removed 20 parking spaces. That's the key number. And we did a little bit of stuff to make the trams go faster, hook turns and signs and these stops and things like that. So pretty minor sort of works. There was a media release from the local traders. They didn't like this idea. Bachelor has failed. They ask a whole lot of people, cyclists, the delivery driver, do you hate this stuff? Yes, I do hate this stuff. So there was a whole lot of protests, and then there was this charter signed with the local council, more trade, not less trade. Safer and reliable travel, but most importantly, give us those parking spots back. So they asked the city engineer to do a report. The city engineer said, well, it didn't really make the trams go faster. Turns out they didn't actually change the tram timetable. Lo and behold, the trams didn't go faster because you were driving the trams to the timetable. So they were a bit more reliable, but not really a surprising result. And you can see it was judged on something, but the institutional factors meant that, with a privatised tram network, they're judged on how on time they are, so of course they're not going to drive faster. So we ended up compromising on a partial removal, and the tram program was fairly scaled back because of the challenges and the bad media faced in the first thing. Similar sort of stuff happened in Stud Road not too long ago. We planned this bus lane, we built it, and then there was a whole lot of protest. The local member asked the people what they thought. The people said we hate it because we like driving our cars, and so we removed it. Similar sort of thing in Toronto. In comes Mayor Rob Ford, 10 years of transportation planning and the Transit City plan out the window. However, he did keep the bit that was underground.